Tilea's Troubles, Part 120. Discord, Dangers, and Disinclination. An excerpt from Bonacorso Fidelibus's work, The Many Wars of the Early 25th Century, the First Months of Summer, 2404. In the far south, there was much relief in Alente, when the Sartosan Corsairs' army moved away from the city, without commencing a siege. Perhaps the mauling they had received at Sassali, or more likely, the haul of loot they had already taken, had convinced them to depart. When it became clear, however, that they were not making their way to their ships in the Black Gulf, but instead had begun marching east along the ancient road towards Pavezzano, the citizens' relief was coloured by concern. Soon, those who liked to boast of their wisdom in the ways of the world were claiming that they had always known this would happen, for pirates never attack strong foes, like a dragon might challenge another of its kind, but instead seek out the weak, like wolves pick out the feeblest amongst their prey. Pavezzano would prove much easier to capture and consume than the stone-walled city of Alente. Despite being hindsight, there was undoubtedly truth to this professed wisdom. The Sartosans had struck first at the relatively small city-state of Lucini, while the prince and his army were absent. Then, upon learning that the army of the VMC had marched far north to assist in the war against the vampire Duchess, they attacked the realm of Alente, although the westerly winds of the recent spring storms had likely played a part in restricting their options, by making an easy return home to Sartosa unlikely. They had not attacked the much richer realm of Portamaggiore, for although Lord Alessio was also fighting in the far north, he had left a substantial force, in size an army, to protect his realm. Nor had the Sartosans sailed to Remus, similarly protected despite its own continued involvement in the war to the north. The Sartosans now discovered that despite their destruction of several companies of Alcentian militia, the stalling at Sassali had allowed time enough for more professional soldiers, including a renowned regiment of mercenary pikemen from the northern parts of the Old World, to be landed at the city of Alente. If there was one thing the VMC had plenty of, it was gold. Their investors' contributions would only dry up if the prospect for future profit began to look less likely. The VMC's ships were still able to serve the port, for although the Sartosan fleet was massed out in the Gulf, only skeleton crews remained aboard. Sufficient, it was thought, to defend themselves, or at the least sail away from any threat, but entirely lacking in the fighting strength required to actively blockade the city from the sea. Furthermore, Captain General Valkenburg was widely reported to be returning from his northern enterprise, with a significant portion of his army to relieve the city. With all this in mind, no doubt, the Sartosan Corsairs had decided now was the time to leave the city's environs. And if they were to return to their ships, then why not do so from the port of Pavezzano, for it was a place their fleet could easily sail to, and which they could loot at their leisure en route to the wharves. At Pavona, only a few days after the young Lord Silvano's departure to assist Campagri in the war against the Uomini Ratto, grave news came to the city of a most inauspicious event. Duke Guidobaldo had been attacked during one of his hunts in the hills to the north of Montorio. The Varezan brigand, the Pettirosso, had attempted to assassinate him with a poison-tipped arrow, seeking vengeance for the death of Lord Lucia. Of course, such a slippery fellow had subsequently escaped, along with his band of robbers, into the wooded hills, while those with the Duke had, at least in the first instance, been distracted by the need to get their master back to the city. Only once this was done did they pursue revenge, sending search parties out to scour the southern stretches of the Trentine hills. It was feared the Duke had been mortally wounded, for his physicians reported that the arrowhead had pierced deep, and the poison had entered his blood to bring about a deathly fever, the gangrene setting in at thrice the normal speed. Within a day, however, his two most able physicians, from the best universities in Estalia, a realm renowned for its medicinal knowledge, announced that his humours had been rebalanced and the poison countered with a potent combination of healing magics and efficacious medicaments, thus thwarting the Duke's death. This caused great relief in the city, then celebrations, encouraged by the Duke's officers and courtiers, who paid for wine to flow from the city's fountains and conduits. Yet the Duke remained bedridden, and it was whispered that he was so weak as to be unable even to feed himself. It was clear he could not continue his daily duties as ruler. His most trusted advisers and privy councillors, knowing this to be a dangerous time for the recently ravaged city-state, what with the ongoing discord with Verezzo, the new threats of the Ratmen and pirates, and the disinclination of the banking families of Tilea to loan the Duke any more moneys, agreed with their lord and master that his son, Silvano, must immediately be recalled to the city to serve as regent during the period of his father's ill health. Lord Silvano was to have full and unbridled authority, so that his father need not be troubled by any affairs of state, neither great nor petty. Indeed, the young lord would effectively be serving an apprenticeship for that which he would attain upon his inheritance. Silvano thus abandoned his noble quest and returned with great alacrity, there to be welcomed home by the city's populace much more keenly than they had so recently bid him farewell, for he was generally considered a hero, having always strived his utmost to fight evil, at no small risk to himself, whether near or far from home, and was known to love both his father and the people of Pavona dearly. Indeed, his new rule, in practice total, at least until his father recovered, was welcomed by many a ruler in Tilea, not least the arch-lector of the Holy Morite Church, Bernardino Ugolini, who knew Lord Silvano well, having served with him in the Vampire Wars, and even once cleared the young nobleman in court of all wrongdoing during the Pavonan mutiny at Viadazza. Most were agreed that Silvano's regency bode well for Pavona and its neighbours, although many were too cautious to admit this was because it meant Duke Guidobaldo's tyranny had, at least for now and perhaps for ever, ended. The young lord's regency was considered a chance for a renaissance for Pavona, an opportunity to begin again afresh, to thrive in trade, to build new alliances and new bonds, and to forge a bright future under the enlightened rule of a valiant, principled and compassionate ruler. It remained to be seen whether Baron Iacopo, regent of Verezzo, would remain implacable in his distrust of Pavona. He himself had served alongside Lord Silvano in the war against the vampires, and so knew full well how different the young man was compared to his father. Yet such was the wickedness of Duke Guidobaldo's past actions that the halfling lord, who loved his old master well and yearned deeply for revenge, might find himself unable to forgive Pavona. If he were to continue his hatred, perhaps it would manifest in something as small as choosing not to punish the brigand Pettirosso for his actions. Or perhaps it would manifest in continuing to prepare for war against Pavona. Another, even more powerful captain, General Valkenburg of the VMC, also had unfinished business with Duke Guidobaldo, concerning a most vile defamation. But the VMC's considerable forces were engaged in wars both to the far north and the far south, proving entirely sufficient distraction to tie them up for some time. Besides, the general had himself yielded to young Lord Silvano's persuasive requests to leave off the siege of Pavona, finding his petitioner to be an honourable enough fellow. All this considered, it could well be that, like several other rulers, General Valkenburg was amenable to the notion of turning over a new leaf in his affairs with Pavona. In the northwest, Lord Alessio Falcone's mighty alliance army was floundering at the edge of the corrupted marshes that had overspilled to claim the environs of the city of Maragliano. On one night, early on in the attempted blockade, a vampiric fiend crept from the city under the cover of darkness, intent on assassinating the Captain General himself. It seems that the unholy priest Biagino hoped to emulate the success his now truly dead mistress had had when she sent Lord Adolfo into the Disciplinati di Moor's camp, so killing both their propositus generalis, Father Caradalio, and his second-in-command, the admonitor Vincenzo, subsequently having such a deleterious effect on the Disciplinati that they were utterly, even easily, wiped out in the field of battle. Luckily, Lord Alessio's personal bodyguard regiment, his brave sea-wolves, discovered the monstrous assassin before it reached Lord Alessio, and, at the cost of many of their own lives, they cut the monster down. Afterwards, Lord Alessio ordered its foul head cut off and placed atop a pike within sight of the city walls. It was doubtful such a sight would in any way stir fear in the foe, but it was at least an advertisement of the Alliance Army's defiance. Several soldiers began taking it in turns to guard the grisly trophy, whilst at the same time adding to the line of observation posts strung about the large army as it prepared for battle. Then, as well as knighting one of the wolves who had fought most bravely, Lord Alessio posthumously honoured those who had died by ordering their names recorded upon the city realm's roll of honour, which kept the memory of all the heroes who had served the state with distinction. It was one thing, however, for soldiers to defeat an assassin, another thing entirely to defeat sickness. The army camp's proximity to a corrupted marsh harbouring a festering mass of undead had concerned Lord Alessio, which is why he had initially attempted to cleanse a route through it in order to attack the city promptly. This proved impossible, due to the dangerously slippery nature of both the foe and the land which harboured them. And so the Captain General ordered a redoubling of the efforts to make rafts, battering rams and towers with which to assault the city walls. Then, at the first inevitable signs of camp fever and the flux, the General ordered the army move to the nearest properly dry land, and instructed his soldiers, and those of the Reman and VMC forces also under his command, to drink only the water brought from the river near the Sonsino watchtower by a dedicated contingent of horse and foot soldiers. Meanwhile, his newly appointed siege master, Captain Guccio, oversaw the construction of several large rafts, including some to carry siege towers and one to carry a battering ram. These were to be propelled through the deeper waters of the marsh now surrounding the city by way of setting poles. Guccio, being a man of great practicality, had ordered the soldiers to practice along a deeply flooded stretch at the eastern edge of the marsh. Where the waters were not so deep, the soldiers would have to dismount the rafts and carry them to the next flooded area. That task did not really require practice, just strength. The army's Captain General, Lord Alessio, had commanded that the soldiers should not be put to unnecessary exercises before the fight ahead, as he did not want them weakened, injured, or made ill by wading the foul waters. The sickness threatening his camp was bad enough, he declared, without risking further losses. Punting, however, he permitted, for the soldiers need not go into the water, nor was it the most taxing of activities. It did, however, require learned skill and practised coordination between the men involved. If necessary, closest to the city walls, where the moat added considerably to the water's depth, oars would have to be employed, but Guccio hoped that would just be a short distance. There would be a lot more punting to do, and plenty of opportunities for insufficiently skilled men to fail. So it was that the Alliance army, so close to the foul enemy and about to embark upon their most difficult assault yet, witnessed the incongruous sight of rafts coursing back and forth along the waters, not entirely unlike gentlefolk at play in gondolas on a moat within a grand city park. In the northeast, the vile Uomini Ratto had pushed further southwards, presumably employing the ancient tunnels known as underpasses, which had long been thought to have mostly collapsed. Emerging south of Campagrotta, upon the far side of the river Terrano, they had sent a terrible engine towards the city, with sufficient guards to ensure it would get close. Luckily for the city, although not at all for those who went out to thwart the engine's advance, it failed to lob its grenado over the walls, but instead blew itself up, instantly killing almost everyone, friend and foe, within 2,000 braccia. A good number of the Compagnia del Sole and the Caracborgo dwarfs survived, for several companies had remained within the city during the attack, and more had, the night before, marched north to Buldio in response to reports of multiple instances of arson, believed to be the Uomini Ratto's main attack, later presumed to have been a deliberate distraction. A regiment of King Jaldiog's dwarfs had been among the casualties, which left Lord Nahak with a much reduced garrison in the city. The Compagnia suffered even more significant losses, several bodies of foot soldiers and companies of light horse, which for a mercenary company was no small matter. One of its captains, the respected Venusto Massin, perished in the blast, but the company's marshal, Captain Luigi Esposito, strode away as if untouched by the effects of the poison, supporting the only two survivors of the regiment he had led onto the field of battle. Or at least he was untouched bodily, for his state of mind was another matter, and, compared to his past self, he was ever after another man entirely. The wizard Perrette, despite having approached the engine to cast her fire magic against it, also escaped, along with her Brabançon riders, for they departed the engine's vicinity just in time. In hindsight, no one questioned the Brabançons' action, for whether they were fleeing in panic or retreating in good order and with good reason, they had avoided almost certain death. To suggest they had done wrong was thus a moot point. Perrette had been wounded during the skirmish, and subsequently kept her own counsel concerning her plans. Only she and her riders knew why they rode from the city so hastily, heading north. It was suggested she might intend to return to Rivola, now that the Uomini Ratto's main strength was removed from there, or that she would take the Nouvelonc Pass back to Bretonnia, or that she intended to hide in the forests and wilderness again, with or without the Arrabbiati's aid, there to nurse her wounds as she had done after Rivola. The most hopeful citizens wondered if she had gone to fetch the Arrabbiati, to aid in Campagrotta's defence, while the more pragmatic knew she had no real reason to do so. She left behind confusion within the city. A huge area of dead and deadly ground now lay to its immediate south, and it was very likely that a Ratman army was close by somewhere. Those who knew something concerning the past wars assumed, with good reason, that the Ratmen had exited through one of their legendary tunnels, hidden somewhere in the rocky, forested hills to the south. If the enemy were there, then they would have to find their way around the poisonous land to cross the river elsewhere, which is possibly why they had yet to appear at the city. Nothing lived in the newly corrupted land, nor, if it entered, could stay alive. And even the river waters were poisoned as they passed through, so that the trees closest to the river began to wither, all the way to its junction with the river Bellagio. It was most fortunate that no large settlement lay any further down the river, for such a place would surely have suffered from the corruption in the waters. It was presumed that the elves of Teto Verde must surely and quickly have noticed the poisoning of the northernmost reaches of their ancient sylvan realm. What they would do in response was not known. The Compagnia del Sole's condottieri general, Bruno Mazzolini, was less than happy to be the governor of a realm now half poisoned, with sickness spreading through the city and panic all around. The dwarven thane, Lord Nahak, recorded in his personal book of grudges that the general and the remaining portion of the Compagnia del Sole intended to quit the realm and flee southwest, leaving it to the Ratmen, with the general declaring in council that no army can hope to win when battling against a plague. Lord Nahak, keenly aware of the danger of remaining in the city when all others were likely to leave or had already left, and that his loyal dwarven warriors were just as susceptible to the Ratmen's foul poisons as any man, marched with his small force to the watchtower of Lugo, on the Carraya del Ferro. There he halted and garrisoned the place, apparently intending thus to guard the gateway to the road to Caratborgo, and at a suitable distance from the miasmic horror to the city's south. There was little in the way of defences, for the tower was more a toll house than a stronghold, so he ordered his soldiers to make what defences they could, and quickly. What few engines they possessed were placed to face towards Campagrotta, for Lord Nahak reckoned any Uomini Ratto advance must surely come from that direction. He seemed to be presuming that the Ratmen's tunnels could not possibly reach his mountain home, for so renowned was the mining skill of dwarfs that any such passageways must surely have been discovered, collapsed, or otherwise rendered impassable. If this were so, then the Iron Road was the only way to Caratborgo. So, while his messenger made his way to King Jaldiog, and any reinforcements made their way down the road to him, he and his rump of a force would have to stand their ground as best they could.